Let me first say a few words about Sir Geoffrey, who has been a barrister since 1979. He served as a part-time judge in England between 1984 and 2018. And between 1998 and 2006, he led the prosecution of Slobodan Milosevic, former president of Serbia at the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia. The older ones among us remember this, the younger ones don't. He was Gresham College Professor of Law between 2012 and 2016. In 2018 till 2019, he was the chair of the China Tribunal, commissioned by the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China and some Falun Gong practitioners. The tribunal focused on the issue of forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience in China. Again, I suppose you know something about it from the media because it was widely reported even in Czech media. In 2020, Sir Geoffrey Nice was asked to become the chair of the Uyghur Tribunal by the World Uyghur Congress, which represents Uyghurs in exile. And on December last year, the tribunal found the People's Republic of China guilty of genocide, crimes against humanity, against the Uyghurs and other minorities in northwest China. Again, something which was reported, which we know very well about from the media. The topic of his talk will be searching for justice, the value of people's tribunals. But before I give him the floor, just a few more remarks. After the lecture will take about 1 hour, and after that there will be space for discussion, which will be moderated by Dr. Ondřej Klimeš from the Oriental Institute of the Academy of Sciences, who is our specialist, well, I don't know whether I can say Uyghur studies, but on topics related to Uyghur history and culture, and we are very proud that he is also teaching courses of Uyghur language at this university, a very rare opportunity, I suppose, in all of Europe. And I should not forget that this event is organized by the Faculty of Arts, and I here express cordial welcome to Sir Geoffrey from the Dean, who unfortunately could not be present. We collaborated with the Forum for Human Rights, and I understand that Forum for Human Rights has some leaflets informing about their activities. So if you are interested in the Forum for Human Rights, you are most welcome to read about it and perhaps join as volunteers. And we also collaborated with Synopsis Project to make this event happen, which Synopsis Project is partly Faculty of Arts project, so it's not a stranger. Well, I think it's everything I have to say, and I give the floor to you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor, and thank you for inviting me. This is the first time I've ever been to Prague. What a wonderful day to see it. It's a sensational place. It is truly remarkable that anyone from Great Britain, England, or the United Kingdom, or whatever we call ourselves, should ever be invited to come and speak to an intelligent audience, because our country is, of course, marked by the fact that it has both engaged in the most stupid act of self-harm by leaving the European Union, has gone further and appointed a selfish, moral-free clown to be the Prime Minister, and, as I understand, dignifies itself by sending airplanes full of drunken youths to your beautiful city whenever there's a chance in the summer. So why you should think anyone is capable of providing anything of intelligence, I don't know, but I will do my best. First of all, you're a very heterogeneous audience, so I don't know at what level of knowledge or otherwise I'm speaking. If you don't understand anything, the best thing is to put up your hand and stop me straight away, or shout or something, because there's nothing more irritating than having heard a sequence of something, argument, whatever it might be, and you miss the middle chain, you know? So just stop me. And we'll have questions at the end, but feel completely free to stop me whenever you like. And if I speak too fast or too quietly, the same thing. It's quite a long time to be threatened with an hour. I might try and make it a bit less, but it's a long time to sit there looking interested. And although I've got thousands of slides here, it's a library really, and so I probably won't show you any, maybe this one and the one after it, and that'll be about it. So you need to know a bit about me, otherwise you'll have no way of validating or doubting what I say. Unlike the present Prime Minister, I'm not a creation of privilege, apart from the fact that I had absolutely terrific parents and a very good school. And after that, I drifted on in life, eventually became a lawyer, sort of lawyer, barrister they call it, for want of anything better to do. And it was okay. I quite liked it. I was okay at it. I did all the usual things. But unlike lots of people in England, I would not go around saying the English legal system is the best in the world. Why not? Well, mostly because Great Britain keeps saying it. And if it keeps saying it, then it can't be right, because people who boast don't tell the truth. So I worked in this legal system. I quite enjoyed it. I could see its good points, but I had doubts. I was prepared always to be skeptical of what I was looking at. And then in 1998, an opportunity came purely by chance to go off and work for the United Nations in, as you've heard, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, known as ICTY. Do you know what I have to ask English students? Mind you, they're less well educated than you. But English students of the age of some of you, I have to ask them if they know where Yugoslavia was. Does any of you not know where Yugoslavia was? It'd be a bit of an admission to make, wouldn't it? Do you all know where Yugoslavia was? Yes, you do. Okay. Well, that's what I went to do in 1998. And what was it like for me? Well, to begin with, I was a bit like a dog with two tails, you know, so exciting. New environment, lots of new people, other systems of law, things to contribute, things to learn. And it was fine. The first trial I did was a big trial. It was about a Croat who was charged with killing Bosnian Muslims. So it was a big trial, but it didn't have huge political interest for other countries. I did another smaller trial, quite a well-known trial, called Goran Yelasic, Jelesic. And this was a short trial I took over from someone else, and it charged genocide. And indeed, it was the first case to reach some form of conclusion about genocide at the tribunal. But it was a very unsatisfactory conclusion and quite complicated, all because the defendant, criminal, perpetrator, whatever you like, was low down in the management chain, and the high-ups in the court didn't want to have their first judgment on genocide in respect of somebody at this position. So all sorts of internal politics occurred. And I suddenly realized that if you work in an international environment or you work for the United Nations, things will never be pure. Not at all. The United Nations is not a pure organization. It is not a good organization. Like any other big organization, a third of the people work hard, a third of the people work medium, and a third of the people are lazy. And it doesn't default to brilliance because big organizations don't like brilliance, just a big organization. But it was vulnerable, as I could see, to unhappy pressures. I went away for a short period of time and came back to lead the prosecution of Slobodan Milosevic. By now, the excellent first prosecutor, that's the chief prosecutor, a Canadian woman called Louise Arbour, a woman of integrity and honesty and decency. Oh dear, I start thinking about Boris Johnson again, but I must stop that. She'd retired to go off and become a judge of Canada's Supreme Court. And she was replaced by a very different type of chief prosecutor, Mrs. Carla Del Ponte from Switzerland, who conceived of the whole business of prosecution in very different terms. In part, she conceived of things in political terms, and she was responsive. She answered to political pressures. And the case of Milosevic was a much, much more difficult case. Why? Because the international community and Serbia had an interest in the outcome. Therefore, if the outcome wasn't likely to be what they wanted, they would apply pressure. And the legal system, I know I'm talking to lawyers tomorrow, and there may be no lawyers here today, but the legal system could never be pure. It was bound to be subject to unpleasant and really quite wicked influences. I'm going to move away from the Yugoslav Tribunal to what you want me to talk about, but I give you this setting so that you can first of all see how I viewed these things. Ordinary chap from England, sort of okay with the English legal system, but didn't like sending people to prison, tended to see crimes in terms of social problems, more interested in background. Found myself looking at a very large trial because I was prosecuting 3 wars, the leader of Serbia involved in 3 conflicts: Croatia, Serbia, Kosovo. Difficult case. And suddenly I find myself not just working a legal machine that I was used to doing, but working a legal machine being pressed by other countries and trying to get the right answer out. Well, I can give you some more details about that if any of you is interested later, or maybe in questions. But that, I think, is probably what further conditioned me, further made me grow up and wake up to the world about me. Because I think until then, I'd led a fairly sheltered life. You know, it's all been easy, most of it in an armchair and living in that funny little island. So I left the United Nations in 2006, and I worked in a few international cases, and I got involved in a few bits of pro bono work. And then somebody said to me, would I like to do something for a people's tribunal? I'm very poorly educated and I had no idea what they were. And what's more, when they asked me to get involved, I didn't think it was a very good idea at all. I thought it seemed a bit silly. So what, if anything, does anybody know about the origins of people's tribunals? Time for an answer. It's very hot in here. So I've got to wake them up with questions. I hope that's all right. So I shan't make you all speak before question time, but it will help if some of you do. Does anybody know what a people's tribunal is and where they started off life? Yes, sir.
I think you gave us a clue in using that image over there.
Yep.
And people will remember Lord Bertrand Russell being involved in the Vietnam trial.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Anybody else want to contribute? Now, thank you. It's very important, not very important, it's quite important to set ourselves in a context. And when I made accurate observations about the nature of my country, I'm aware that the comfort of my background is different from the comfort, if not of your backgrounds here in this country, certainly the backgrounds of your parents, for which you will have oral history of conflict with the state. very different for us in the comfortable West. And in the comfortable West, that's Northern Europe and America, remember that after the Second World War, there was no doubt about who was the victors. We were. And then there was no doubt about what was on this side, capitalism, communism. We didn't have to worry about that side. We had a nicely confined, safe environment in which to move forward. And we did move forward in a really interesting way. If you go onto the internet and do some primitive research, you type in United Kingdom films 1945, 1946, 1947, and so on, you'll find film after film that is trivial, light-hearted, humorous, almost none of them serious. Just a few war stories, but nothing serious. 15 years after the end of the First World War, no more, just 15 years, the Beatles arrived and the Rolling Stones. They never sang a song about history. They sang a song only about looking forward. We were that lucky. We heard about what happened in Prague. We felt sorry for you, didn't do much more. We were selfish, self-contained, and fortunate. But sometimes things did worry us. And the Vietnam War was perhaps the earliest one for many of us that caused real concern. But, and this is important to understand, in the Vietnam War, what could we do to change the outcome? It's there on the picture behind me. We could demonstrate. And that is all we could do. There was no other mechanism available to us. And if you look at the many, many images of Vietnam War protests around the world, because there were lots of them, and they had some effect, you'll find almost none that refer to what America had done, which is now generally accepted as war crimes, being subject to some kind of judicial process. There was no court to which they could be taken. All we could do is that, and in very extreme cases, and I say this because I'm told that there's a horrible echo of this in the death in the square beside me. One person certainly did that, which was to burn himself alive in front of the office of the Defense Secretary McNamara as the only ultimate form of protest he could make. Let's not leave that picture up too long. We were then in a society that had no judicial, I'm going to move out of the way of the sun, sorry, no judicial process for dealing with war crimes, international things done wrong. And all we could do was protest. And so it was that Lord Russell, an English aristocrat almost, very upper class, high intellectual philosopher, and Jean-Paul Sartre, French philosopher, and a lot of other very high-powered people, Simone de Beauvoir, English agitator called, not agitator, protester called Tariq Ali, lots of other people, set up the Russell Tribunal. Now, in many ways, the Russell Tribunal was out of joint. It was wrong because it only looked at the American criminality. It refused to look at what the North, do you know about Vietnam? North, South, Viet Cong, South Vietnam? If you don't, talk about it later. In any case, up there with the Viet Cong fighting back. They won, America lost. But the tribunal was not prepared to look at them, only at this lot. And all the tribunal members, if you look at them, they were already hostile to America. They were anti-American. And so there's a lot you can read about the Russell Tribunal, and I'm not going to put the slides up because I don't think it would be helpful. loads of really interesting quotations. But in the end, they found all sorts of crimes proved against the United States, including genocide, and probably had very little effect. But they'd done their best. And as Jean-Paul Sartre said in his opening speech, what they were doing was filling a gap. What was the gap? The gap was a gap of knowledge. The world needed to know whether what was happening, what was being done by the Americans, in particular with use of things like a chemical called Agent Orange and stuff like that, spraying where the North Vietnamese were, was that a crime? Why can't somebody tell us? And so the tribunal said, well, they can't, we will. And they did. And to this day, it is the only quasi-judicial, it is the only evidence-based record of findings about criminality by the United States in the Vietnam War. So that is what they do, or did. And another phrase that Sartre uses, and we'll pause on this for a minute, because I maybe will ask you some questions. Another phrase that Sartre uses, which is worth thinking about, he said, our powerlessness is our power. The fact that we have no power is our power. And you need to think about it and let it sink in. And you need to contrast that conception with what you see all around you in the very well-intentioned work of non-governmental organizations, of charities, of all sorts of other things, which never wish to say of themselves that they have no power. No, they always want to say, we have power, we'll make you, the government, do that. We'll make that other government do this. We'll make that branch of society do the other thing. No. If you do that, sometimes you have less power than if you say, we have no power, but here is a fact. So that's how these things, in a sense, started. And coming back to my involvement, I was, as you heard me say, skeptical, doubtful of the value of such things when I was asked to take part in something called the Iran Tribunal. The Iran Tribunal considered the action by the Ayatollahs of Iran in the late 1980s, when their internal conflict wasn't going quite so well, and they wanted to kill off the opposition who they got in jail. And there's a horrible series of killings. Here's what's interesting, is interesting for me looking back. I took a tiny part in the process to begin with. Not for me. But okay, I'll be on the steering committee or something. So I was on the steering committee. And there was another lawyer, because I'm a sort of lawyer. So two of us on the steering committee. And we gave lots of advice to the diaspora, who weren't lawyers. And the diaspora, generally speaking, rejected our advice. And the diaspora usually turned out to be correct. So I realized that if you have civilians, non-specialists, but people with an interest, trying to get something done, they probably know what they're doing. And you've got to be cautious about letting lawyers get in the way and mess it up. So I didn't take much of a part in the first bit, but I took a slightly more significant part in the second bit, which happened in this most beautiful conference center in The Hague at the Peace Palace. And as I've been explaining over lunch to Edita, at the end of it, when the judges brought in their decision, I realized that setting a record by people, the diaspora, for people, the victims or the bereaved, was a really powerful thing to do and could have its own value, regardless of anything else. And it actually impressed me more in many ways than the things I'd done trying people for genocide in the major conflicts of the Western Balkans. But that tribunal did not turn out to be without teeth. Of course, nobody took notice of it at the time, in the sense that Iran didn't take any notice of it, and it was a historical event. But the judgment of the tribunal named individuals who it said were culpable. And one of those individuals, who sat on one of these death committees, what happened was you'd be in prison, you'd be dragged before the death committee, and your trial would be, do you turn to Allah? And if you don't, you'd be hanged just down at the end of the corridor. And believe me, the evidence is hard to read. Okay, one of the people, there are two people on this death committee. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm not going to move on unless you get the right answer. One of the principal members of this death committee became a minister in the next but one government in Iran. Of which minister was this death committee killer? Of which ministry was he the minister?
Justice.
Correct in one. Absolutely right. I shouldn't laugh, but it is extraordinary. Another member of that or another death committee was unwise enough to land in Stockholm. And in Stockholm they have what's called universal jurisdiction. You can be tried, if you're on Swedish soil, for certain crimes wherever they are committed, and even if their commission and the country has no connection to Sweden. There's quite a lot of that universal jurisdiction. And he landed in Sweden, and because of the evidence that the tribunal had found, he's on trial right now for about 6 months on the most serious charges. And he will go to prison for a very long time if he's convicted. So, people's tribunals are not entirely hopeless. They bring great things to the interested parties. They set a record, Russell's the only record of Vietnam of that kind, and they can even bring people to justice. My next experience was as a judge. I didn't want to be a judge, I wanted to be an advisor, but they pressed when I was a judge on something called the Indonesia Tribunal, which looked into, well, who here knows what the year might be, what date might be of the event into which the Indonesia Tribunal inquired? What year?
1965.
Yes, sir, you're completely correct. Did anybody else know that? Can you tell us about it?
Well, this was the year when the conflict inside Indonesia between what was considered the communist underground by the government and the government forces came to a head. The communists were supposedly having support from the Communist Party of China or the government of China, and the Indonesian military suppressed what it said was the uprising. It was an uprising by the communists in advance, some say, without there having been a real uprising, and I don't know, about 500,000 people.
Or even more. I mean, the estimates go over 1 million. Thank you. And the killings, there are a couple of films, don't watch them on a full stomach. They are extraordinarily difficult to watch because they are graphic accounts by the killers of how they killed 500,000, 1 million people. And why don't you know about it, the rest of you? The answer's already been given in a way. The victims were communist, and at that time, the collaborators with the criminal regime in Indonesia were, amongst others, the United States and Great Britain, who were in various ways giving a helping hand. So of course they didn't want the truth to be known. Of course there is no full international justice mechanism. And so this Indonesian tribunal tried to deal with that, did deal with that. I found it unsatisfactory in several ways, but it didn't matter. I took part in it for most of its life, some of its life. But I now learnt a few things which for me were important about the potential value, and it's no more than that, of informal processes in certain limited circumstances. And if those circumstances exist, and if an informal process can work, then you can have this range of benefits. One, you set a record, no record before. Indonesia is actually quite a good example of that, because whatever the shortcomings of the process, the record is there. It does an enormous amount of good for those who still survive and who look for some kind of remedy or resolution. And it can even bring people to justice. And so we now come to the two tribunals that I chaired. And why? The first one is again interesting for its history. And that's the China Tribunal, which was a tribunal into the process of forced organ harvesting. And the title of the tribunal is Forced Organ Harvesting of Prisoners of Conscience. And for the most part, the evidence indicated that the prisoners of conscience were practitioners of Falun Gong. Anybody know what Falun Gong is? You do.
Everybody.
But we won't press you now, later. Have I got anything wrong so far?
No.
Okay, good. Well, I'll do better. The Falun Gong are a really dangerous bunch of people. They are not separatists. They are not violent. They don't drink. They don't smoke. And they do lots of exercises. So they're rather fit. And they became immensely popular in China, so popular that they had to be persecuted. Am I still on track?
Yes, perfect.
Good. Right. By the time they became unpopular and were arrested, China had already developed a practice of killing prisoners who'd been sentenced to death under a very wide capital punishment program, killing them and taking out their organs and using them for transplant. The practice started probably in the 1960s, long time ago, with beneficiaries usually being Communist Party leaders. It developed to such an extent that by 1998, an authoritative Human Rights Watch report wrote about this, but not with a focus on the transplant. It was actually writing about the capital punishment system, and it just sort of threw in that this is what happened. Eventually, China was compelled by international opinion to give up, or to say it gave up, using the organs of capital punishment prisoners for forced organ harvesting. Who knows whether it ever has done. And it turned to the Falun Gong. There they were in prison. Fit, no smoking, no drinking. And worse, when they were arrested at demonstrations, they knew that if they were identified by the authorities, there was a real risk that the authorities would go to their hometowns and villages and persecute their relations. So they were stripped voluntarily by themselves of material of identification. So they were an anonymous organ bank. What more could a country that was developing its skills in organ transplantation surgery, so that it had already become, or was becoming, not just world class, but world leaders? It was well placed. And the allegations about this started at the beginning of the 2000s, so that, for example, there was a congressional hearing in 2002 with witnesses telling the United States Congress what had happened. And then you'll see, and you can find this in the judgment of the China Tribunal, lots more periodically hearings in America, but also in England and elsewhere, Australia, detailing what it was said was going on. But the strange thing was, in the English idiom, and tell me if nobody understands what it means, because I'm not really sure I do, it never gained traction. Is that a word you use? It never cut through. And so, for example, if you look back in the years before the China Tribunal to questions in the Westminster Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, those people who were concerned about this would ask questions about what was going on, and the minister in one house or the other would say, "Oh gosh, this is very troubling, and we're so grateful to you for raising these issues, but we don't think the evidence is quite good enough." And they went on saying that for year after year. Sometimes they'd say, "Our analysis says it's not good enough." There was no analysis. They just never wanted to acknowledge that these things might be happening because they wanted to be China's best friend. Am I still on target, sir?
Yes.
I have to be very careful with true academics in the room because I'm not one. But we did our best. So, this is where I was asked if I'd write an opinion, a legal opinion, on whether what was happening in China was criminal. And I said, well, that'd be a bit of a waste of time. Nobody would read it. It probably wouldn't make an op-ed or leader column in a suburban newspaper in Prague. I didn't actually use the example of Prague, but I might have done. I mean, it would do nothing. And I said, this was about 2016, 15. I said, nothing's happened in the last 15 years. The countries refuse to recognize it because they want to be buddies with China. So have you thought about a people's tribunal? And they thought that was a really bad idea, because why would they want somebody else to look at something where they already knew what the answer was? And the research was very compelling. But eventually I didn't press them. I just said, well, if you want to, we'll have a go at it. And I think because they couldn't cut through, because their campaign couldn't get traction, they said, okay, it's that difficult in the modern world to make countries sit up and take notice that we'll have a people's tribunal. So one was established, and now I had certain views as to about how they should be run, and that one was run in accordance with those principles, but I've fleshed them out a bit for the Uyghur Tribunal, so I'll list them then. But the China Tribunal, I think, was quite effective, but quite slow in its effect. Reported on the 17th of June of 2019, I read out the judgment. There were some journalists in the hall. One or two newspapers reported it, but not all. But then is that surprising? At that time, the Daily Telegraph, I think, had a paid monthly or bi-monthly supplement on China. The same. Does any of you watch BBC Two and a program called Newsnight? The principal daily.
I do it.
You do, wonderful. The principal. I will have a glass. It's so hot. Don't worry. It's the principal, serious, late night political program. And it had prepared a film on this tribunal. It had seen witnesses, perpetrators. I think it had spoken to me, possibly to other members of the tribunal, I can't remember. Ready to go. And in the afternoon I got a phone call saying, oh, sorry about this, the Foreign Office has walked in and told us not to air it, not to screen it. Think you live in a free world? It was never screened. And this is in Great Britain. Free, you know, what is it? Mother of parliaments, home of democracy, all that sort of rubbish? No. Don't show that film. Film not shown. So it took some time for the judgment of the China Tribunal to start becoming valuable. But it has happened. And it has happened because all it does is, Sartre again, fill a gap. It says in an analytical way, here's the evidence, here's the law, here's the conclusion. In the course of that tribunal, we realized that there was more that might have been said about the Uyghurs who live in northwest China and are Muslim. And we realized we hadn't quite done enough for them, but we took no initiative, that is, that tribunal took no initiative, until the World Uyghur Congress asked us to do a tribunal. And we agreed to do one. And that tribunal had the fortune, good or bad, of suddenly having a reversal of thinking in the world at large. Now, every government was hostile to China. It changed very suddenly. The beginning of 2020, I suppose, 2020 was it? I can't remember. After we started our work, but fairly soon after. So we suddenly had this following wind behind us. Now, as opposed to governments refusing to say nasty things about China, they said increasingly nasty things about China. But they would certainly not say that China had committed genocide. Would you like to know why? Yes. Does anybody know why no government will say of another government that it's committing genocide?
Otherwise it makes it responsible.
Yes, but and why is it responsible?
Because it's genocide. This is a crime against humanity.
No, well, yes and no. Close. After the Second World War, long story, wonderful story, not time to tell it, the sociological concept of genocide was formulated by a man called Raphael Lemkin for reasons of historical interest, but largely cynicism of the great Western powers. He forced it to become a convention because it was the only way he could achieve what was his objective. And from the convention of 1948 enforced in 1951, it has become a crime. And it's a crime in lots of statutes, in the Yugoslav statute, in the Rwanda statute, in the International Criminal Court statute. But what is a real problem is that the countries that ratified or acceded to the Genocide Convention are bound by Article 1. And Article 1 says that they undertake to prohibit and punish genocide wherever it occurs. And the International Court of Justice has ruled on it to this extent that it says that means immediately. And you can probably understand, if you sort of go back 70 plus years, and then turn yourself into a person aged 40, 50, 60, who will have seen not one world war but two, to have seen how the horrors of mass destruction are to some extent a slow burn. The Armenian massacre, now generally regarded as a genocide in the First World War, was decades in the making. The genocide of the Jews in the Holocaust starts with serious anti-Semitism in the mid-30s, but only becomes the killing machine in the 1940s. So imagine yourself there drafting this convention. You know that what you've got to do is not stop something when it has happened, but that you've got to stop something before it happens, but once you can recognize that it is going to happen. And is that the reason the undertaking in Article 1 is so strong? Maybe. And maybe our modern politicians, who of course have not lived through any world war so far as the United Kingdom is concerned, those politicians don't have that visceral experience. They should. Because although at the moment what's happening in Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs are, is not at all the Holocaust, there is no mass killing. Not at all. It is nevertheless genocide as defined under one of its 5 possible mechanisms in the Genocide Convention. And like all genocides, it could easily slow burn. So of course action has to be taken. And of course, that is why all countries, bar a rather curious exception, have done everything they can not to call it as genocide. So when asked to set up this tribunal, I approached it with, actually I did it with a man called Nick Vetch, who's the vice chairman, and he was also a member of the China Tribunal. He's a businessman. So those of you who think you're perhaps human rights specialists or NGOers or something like that, what's a businessman doing with something as important as this? Well, the answer is a great deal more than many of the specialists might do. Because what I wanted for this tribunal, and what has proved to be invaluable, is that the composition of the tribunal is not specialist, it's not lawyers, it's not NGO types, it's not people who've got the words human rights hung round their neck. It's just citizens of the world, acting like jurors in a jury to fill a gap of knowledge and to do it reliably. The mixed composition of the tribunal is, in my reckoning, one of its greatest strengths. And the rest of the principles I applied was as we applied, Nick and I applied, were as follows. You start with a blank piece of paper. No presumptions, no assumptions. You just wait to see what the evidence is. You arrange for the evidence to be gathered widely and for it to be carefully selected so as to be fair to everyone, including the People's Republic of China. Critically important. Insofar as the tribunal needs money, not for us, we all had to work, wanted to work, completely unpaid, and I did not allow anyone to put any money into the tribunal. We had to be completely disinterested, neutral. Disinterested, for those of you who don't know it, different from uninterested. Disinterested, objective. And so the money, the initial money, had to be funded by, in this case, the World Uyghur Congress, who'd asked us to do the tribunal, together with some crowdfunding and other public funding. You get the evidence in, and you look at the evidence before you look for crimes. You're not there to look for crimes. You're much more cautious than that. You look for what the evidence shows. And only when you started to form conclusions about what the evidence shows, you then ask independent lawyers to tell you what the law is. You draw no inferences against China from the fact that it said horrible things about us, or that it didn't answer questions when we wrote to them. No. It's entitled to do that. It's a very large country. Wouldn't matter if it was a small country. We're not there to make findings based on what we don't have or what unpleasant things people say about us. We're just there to look at the evidence, nothing more. And that's what we did. For those of you who know anything about Western or other criminal trials of individuals, we said the standard of proof that we should apply, that is, of what must you be satisfied before you can make a factual finding, we said proof beyond reasonable doubt, the highest test. Lots of lawyers were telling us, no, apply a lower test and you can find more bad things. No, we said, no. We'll be as cautious and conservative as we can. The law's quite complicated, although the convention is quite short, only a few articles, but it's not entirely straightforward. And because there have been so few cases, why, there's no judicial decisions about it. And there's some great areas of uncertainty, at least for me, I thought. And so we only applied the law that was completely clear. And on the basis of the application of the law to the facts found on those principles, we concluded that there had been both torture and crimes against humanity, and one limb of genocide, that is the limb concerning interference with births, measures to restrict births. And then what did we do? What would you have expected us to do? Go on. I've been at it for 55 minutes. Can somebody say something? What would you expect us to do? Don't forget, this involved me, I suppose, in 1,000, 1,500 hours of work, unpaid, of course, what I chose to do. Likewise, Nick, the tribunal members, hundreds of hours. What would you expect us to do? We reached this conclusion. What would you expect us to do with it?
Report to the governments of your own countries, maybe, and then speak to
A little louder, if you wouldn't mind.
So, well, report it to the government of your respective.
Report it to the government. Thank you. Anything else?
Reach out to the media.
Tell the media. Well, they came to the hearing, but yeah, maybe, yeah.
I think I come from China. What has the country to say to these accusations? I of course know nothing about the law or something, but that comes as a logical conclusion.
I can't hear you terribly well, I'm afraid. And if you're not allowed to take your mask off, I can't compel you to.
When speaking, you are allowed.
No, it was not important.
Don't worry.
I believe the suggestion was the People's Republic of China should be informed.
Everybody
about
should be
the
informed.
result.
Well, yes, sir.
In the light of what you said about the first article of the Convention on Genocide, wouldn't it be logical to press governments that are required to prosecute in this case?
Yeah.
Because one leg, as you said, or one limb of the Genocide Convention was shown to be applied by the Chinese in their treatment of the Uyghurs.
Well, all really good ideas. So what did we do? Nothing. And we did nothing intentionally. And we did nothing intentionally because, just think it through, most reports of this kind, and there have been quite a lot of reports on the Uyghurs, and at the end of the report there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 pages of recommendations to everyone under the sun as to how they should organize their lives. What a cheek. What an impertinence to think that your fellow citizens, able to know the truth, will not perform their duty. Better by far, we judged, to say, and of course it goes to the press, So to that, and it goes to the I think we did send a copy to the People's Republic of China to make sure that's about it. You've got to inform certain people, just inform. And after that, nothing. We started off as non-activists in the sense that we are not particularly concerned about the Uyghurs. It sounded harsh when I said it, but you now understand why. And at the end, we are still non-activists. We've done our job in a world which, remember, America never on trial, and in Indonesia never on trial, Iran never on trial, China Tribunal, government tries to interfere, press don't report. We've done what is missing. We've filled the gap with safe, secure conclusions. Every bit of the evidence is in public. Every witness is videoed. Every document can be read. The argument is set out in the judgment. It's all there. If you want to say it's wrong, explain why. Otherwise, from that stage on, if you have a duty to perform because you interact in some way with the People's Republic of China, you have a choice to bring that fact, which has not been moderated by governments or the UN. No, it's just a fact, and you can bring it into account. And it seems to me that the principles that underlie that approach, and I repeat, People's Tribunals are heterogeneous. They're not really a group of the same thing. They're all very different. But that approach may be worth your while, those of you who've got many more decades left to live, having in mind whenever you are inclined to do a bit of work in the public sphere. I put it another way sometimes, and then I'll shut up, finish. In the pub, if you're doing work of this very general kind, or activity of this general kind, you're likely to have really strong emotions about a government or an organization that you feel is letting you down, or letting the country down, or letting the world down. And your instincts may well be to go and savage them, to attack them. It's not actually likely to do very much good. It may be much better to say, well, the time may arrive when that institution will be ready for the guns and the barricades because we'll have to destroy it, it's so bad. But that time has not been reached yet. And therefore what we should do in the meantime is apply some principles by which maybe good can be done, not by stealth, but by being completely open and modest in the overall ambition. Time for some questions.